We warned him.
Yeah, we did.
All right. My short one? Yeah, we're missing somebody. Yeah, but we have 12, 16, 18. No, we got everybody. I don't know.
We have 19.
Oh, I've only got 18 here. Yeah, I thought there was an empty chair. Okay, there we go. All right. You may proceed, Mr. Binger.
Thank you, Judge. The state calls Ryan Balch.
Oh, it's getting cold in here again. You agree? All right. Isn't just me.
Stand, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony about to give this matter be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated.
Could you make sure you pull that microphone close to your mouth and state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Ryan Balch, B-A-L-C-H,
Where do you live currently? What city or town?
Jackson, Wisconsin.
Back in August of 2020, was that where you lived at that time as well?
That is correct.
And how are you currently employed?
I am employed doing manufacturing work.
Now, was there a time in your past where you served in the United States military?
That is correct.
Can you tell us about that, please?
From 2008 to 2013, served the United States Army as an infantryman. One tour to Iraq, one tour to Afghanistan.
And I want to turn your attention to the night of August 25th, 2020. Did you come down to Kenosha that evening?
I did.
Why?
We had been watching it on the news. Some of the people I knew within the protest group had said that things were rough down there. Somebody made mention of a Facebook post. I didn't really pay attention to that one too much. But in general, we just decided to come down and help out.
When you say we, who are you referring to?
The four people that accompanied me.
What are their names?
Jason Lekowski, Dustin Collette, and there was a female, I didn't know her name.
Prior to that particular night, did you know Dustin Collette and Jason Lekowski?
I had known Jason for about 4 to 5 years, knew Dustin about 3 weeks.
Where you lived in Jackson at the time, where did those other individuals live?
Jason lived in Brown Deer, and Colette lived in West Bend.
Now, you indicated that you'd heard from some protesters that things were rough in Kenosha?
Correct.
When did you hear that?
During the first night of the protests and the riots.
Just so we're clear about when you say the first night.
August 24th.
Okay.
Would have been.
The situation kind of began with the shooting of Jacob Blake on Sunday night, August 23rd.
Correct.
There were incidents that night. Monday night, August 24th. There were incidents that night. And, of course, Tuesday night, August 25th is the night that we're going to be talking about. Do you remember which of the first two nights it was that you first heard about things? Was it Sunday or Monday?
Anybody I had contact with wasn't down there for the 23rd. So everything I heard about was on the 24th.
Were you personally down here on the 23rd or 24th?
No.
The first time you came down was on Tuesday?
Yes.
And when you traveled down here, you mentioned there were 3 other folks with you, a female, and then Mr. Lekowski and Mr. Collette. Who all traveled together?
I have to backtrack a little bit. Me and Colette rode together, and the female rode with, I forget the other guy's name that she rode with.
Jason Lekowski?
No, Jason Lekowski came in later in the evening.
I see. Okay. You have identified Dustin Collette and Jason Lekowski as people you already knew.
Yes.
there's a female you've mentioned. Was there anyone else coming down that you knew before this night?
Danton Mertz would be somebody that I knew as well.
And that's Danton Mertz?
Yes.
Okay. How long had you known him?
About the same amount of time I'd known Colette.
Just about 3 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know where he was from?
West Bend.
We'll talk in a minute about where you wound up coming to in Kenosha, but when you were thinking about coming down, when you were driving on down to Kenosha, what was your plan? Where were you going to go?
We really didn't have a set destination. There had been several places that we'd been told might need some help. But when we came in, most of those places were already occupied. So we ended up on Sheridan Road at 63rd and Sheridan.
Do you remember any of those other locations that you'd heard about?
They were car lots. I don't remember specifically the names.
Okay. Obviously now you're familiar with Car Source.
Correct.
Prior to coming down to Kenosha, had you ever heard of Car Source before?
I didn't know it existed.
Obviously had never shopped or worked there before.
No.
Okay. When was it that you first learned anything about Car Source?
When we arrived.
And when you say when you arrived, where exactly did you arrive at?
The Car Source location on 63rd and Sheridan.
Okay. There is a little pen in front of you, right in front of you, sir.
Yep.
And if you push the button near the end, there's a laser pointer. Can you, on that map behind you, can you identify that location for us? Okay. And that's the Car Source at the northwest corner of 63rd and Sheridan, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, you indicated you arrived there. You've identified some other folks that were coming down with you. Did they all come to that location too?
Everyone but Jason Lukowski.
And you mentioned he arrived later.
Right.
Okay. So in this initial group, you've identified Dustin Collette, Danton Mertz, an unknown female, and yourself. Is that right?
That is correct.
And all of you wound up starting at that Car Source.
That is correct.
Tell us what happened when you arrived there.
When we arrived, we encountered, there were 5 individuals on the car lot at the time. One guy was working for the hospital, and he was in full military issue gear. And there was Kyle and his friends there as well. I talked to the guy who worked for the hospital for a few minutes. Then we went over and talked to Kyle and his friends.
And when you say Kyle, you mean the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse.
That is correct.
Do you remember the names of his friends?
I remember Nathan and Dominic.
And what happened then?
We asked them what their plan was, what they were doing. They kind of explained that they worked for the Car Source facility. And then they described that there were 3 other locations. And then at that point, the owner to Car Source showed up.
Did you speak with that person?
I did not.
Do you know that person's name?
I have no idea.
What did you do next?
We kind of, at that point, several vans pulled up full of people. They got out. Most of them, there was one guy who was armed similar to the way we were. The rest were armed with bats, and one of them had like an axe. So melee type stuff. They were there to brawl. They came over to talk to us. The guy and Kit came and talked to me. They agreed to stay at the location in 63rd and Sheridan, and we were going to go to 59th and Sheridan.
I want to ask a couple of clarification questions. First of all, you said some of the folks were, I think you said dressed like you or equipped like you. I'm not sure how you phrased it, but can you tell us what you mean by that?
The one guy that I spoke to was wearing a plate carrier carrying an AR-15.
Okay,
Sorry, wearing what?
I'm sorry. A plate carrier, body armor, and carrying an AR-15.
Did you have body armor on?
I did.
And you were carrying an AR-15?
This is correct.
This other person you talked to, were they ex-military like you? Do you remember?
They said that they had worked for Blackwater.
And that's a private security contractor?
That's a private security contractor.
Okay. You mentioned you said vans, I think, more than one?
Correct. There were 2 vehicles at least that showed up.
Do you know where those folks came from?
I didn't question them.
Had you ever seen or met any of those folks before?
No.
Other than the people you've described coming down with, Dustin Collette, Danton Mertz, the unknown female, and later on Jason Lukowski.
Right.
Other than those folks, the people you encountered on this particular evening, either at this location or elsewhere, had you met any of them before?
No.
Obviously, never met the defendant before?
No.
Had no idea who he was before that night?
Nope.
Okay. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You mentioned that one of the folks that came in the vans was similarly equipped as you, and then the rest had different types of, I think you characterized them as melee weapons. Would that be fair to say?
That would be fair to say.
Meaning not guns such as handguns or shotguns or AR-15s.
Correct.
And I believe you said that at some point there was an understanding that those folks that came in the vans would stay at 63rd Street Car Source, and some of you, including yourself, would go up to the 59th Street Car Source. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
What time of day was this when you were having this encounter at the 63rd Street Car
It was
Source?
approximately 7:30 p.m.
You were aware that the city of Kenosha had a curfew that night at 8 p.m., correct?
Correct.
You intended to stay past the curfew time. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
I know you mentioned earlier something about hearing about the prior night's events, things like that. And maybe I asked this, and you may have given me a little bit of an answer, but what were you actually intending to do physically? Like, what were you actually going to do when you got here to Kenosha?
The intent when we got down there was to stop the people from looting and rioting and whatnot. Most of the protesters that I talked to before coming down there were trying to control them throughout the night, and it just wasn't working. So we were there to be more of a deterrence than anything.
What were you going to do yourself, personally, to accomplish that goal?
Pretty much tell people to stop. Just be, I mean, throughout the night it kind of proved out that we didn't have to actually do anything to not have them do it. Just us being there seemed to work. And that was kind of my intent the whole time, was to just be there, be seen, and to deter people from doing that.
You mentioned your AR-15 and your body armor that you were wearing. Beyond that, what sort of equipment did you bring along to assist you? Maybe not stuff you actually used, but things you brought along in preparation for this night.
Dustin Collette had brought some pepper spray grenades with him, and he kind of handed those out.
We've seen photographs of you and videos of you, which we'll get to in a little bit. It appears that you've got maybe a utility belt on or something like that. I don't know. Can you tell us in your own words what other things you had on your body in terms of equipment?
I had extra ammunition and extra medical equipment.
Any other types of weapons or self-defense equipment on you?
I had a Glock 17 handgun, ammunition for that. But as far as a less than lethal option, no.
Okay. You talked about your desire to serve as a deterrent to people. What was it about you or your actions that you thought would work as a deterrent?
Typically the people that were, and from what I'd been told by the protesters and stuff, they were selecting places that were unguarded, that there was nobody there, that they could just go in and do what they need, light it on fire, take whatever they wanted, and roll out after that. So figured just being there would be enough.
If just being there was enough, why did you bring along an AR-15, a handgun, and wear body armor?
Well, because those people could be armed too. If I'm going to get shot, I'd rather have body armor on, first and foremost. and I would like to be able to defend myself from it as well.
So is it fair to say that coming down to Kenosha that night, you were prepared for the possibility that there would be gunfire?
That's correct.
You were prepared to use your gun to defend yourself?
That is correct.
Were you planning on using the gun to protect the property that you were guarding?
No.
So, for example, we know that you were at the 59th Street car source for
That
a
is
lot of the
correct.
evening. If you had seen someone attempting to damage a vehicle, would you have used your gun and fired at that person to protect that property?
No.
At any point that evening, and I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but I'm trying to get to a point here, did you go inside the 59th Street car source?
A couple of times, yes.
What was inside there?
Several cars that were being worked on, some tables, some chairs.
Was there a living quarters or an apartment or anything like that where someone was able to sleep or live?
Not that I saw, but I did see that it was attached to a gas station.
Do you know if the gas station was open and in business at that time?
When we walked by, it appeared to be in business.
But it's fair to say that no one was living here. This was all business property. Fair
That
to
is
say?
fair to say.
As opposed to a house or an apartment.
That is fair to say.
If there had been any sort of damage to the building, the car source building, such as being lit on fire or rocks thrown at it or anything like that, would that have caused an injury or a death to a person?
Had the fire spread to the residential buildings behind it, yes.
Okay. At any point in this evening, did anyone try and start a fire at that car source location?
Later on in the evening, they tried to start a dumpster on fire, and before that, they tried to light the church next door on fire.
And that's the church that's to the north across 59th Street?
Correct.
Okay. The dumpster that was attempted to be started on fire was actually located in the street when that event occurred. Is that right?
Correct. They pulled it off the parking lot area of car source and lit it on fire in the street.
So rather than try and light the fire where the dumpster is in the car source lot, they took it out in the road and then lit it on fire.
Correct.
And I believe that's where, at some point that evening, Dustin Collette goes out and puts the fire out.
That is correct.
Okay. I skipped around a little bit there. I want to go back to where we were. I believe you were describing how there was vans that met at 63rd. There was some sort of understanding that they would stay there, and you and others would go up to the 59th Street car source. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
What did you do after that?
I went across the street to the hospital where the other guy had gone. I met their guy they had watching the gate, and I didn't wholly trust the people who had agreed to stay down at 63rd. So I gave him my cell phone number and said, hey, if these guys leave or somebody starts breaking stuff, call us.
Did you ever get a call that night?
No.
What did you do after that?
We kind of gathered up. I think we took a picture, and then we went up to 59th.
When you say we went up to 59th, who all came along with you?
That would have been Dustin, the female, Danton Mertz, Kyle Rittenhouse, Dominic, and Nathan.
Other than the folks you just mentioned, did anyone else come along that you can recall?
Not that I can recall.
Is it fair to say that when you first got to the 59th Street location, the people you just mentioned was the group that was there protecting that property?
Yes.
I know Jason Lukowski comes later. Other than him, was anyone else there that night at 59th Street that may have arrived later to help with what you were doing?
Some family members from Kyle's friends showed up.
Do you remember who they were?
One of them was one of their fathers. There was somebody else that came through. They were there for 5-10 minutes and they left. I didn't know who that was.
Do you remember approximately what time it was when you got up to the 59th Street car source location?
We crossed 60th right as the sirens went off at 8 p.m. So we arrived at 59th around 8:01, 8:02.
Where did you position yourself at that point?
I stayed on the ground outside in the car lot area. Most of the cars were burned out at that point, and some of the guys went up on the roof, and some of us stayed down on the ground level.
Now, you mentioned earlier you met the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse, that evening,
Correct.
and that was first at the 63rd Street car source, right?
Yes.
And then he came along up to the 59th Street car source.
Yes.
Did he ever tell you how old he was?
We asked the group when we first got there. They looked kind of young, and the general consensus was 19.
Not sure what you mean by general consensus. Is that something the defendant actually said?
It seemed like as a group they were saying it, and I didn't ask. I was just kind of off to the side when that conversation happened.
After everything happened on August 25th, you met with an FBI agent by the name of Tim Walther at your residence up in Jackson. Do you remember that?
I do.
And do you remember him talking to you about this particular night?
Yes.
And do you remember telling him, and I'm going to quote from your statement here, Rittenhouse told Balch that he was 19. However, Balch thought he was younger. Do you remember saying that to the agent?
I do.
Did the defendant say anything else to you about himself or his qualifications or anything like that?
Early on in the night, no.
Is it fair to say that as the night went on, while you were on the ground in front of the 59th Street car source, the defendant was also in that proximity area?
That is correct.
Were there times during the evening when you would chat with him about various things?
That is correct.
What was your impression of the defendant?
He seemed like a young and impressionable kid. I use that term kind of broadly there. Someone way younger than myself. He seemed to be really interested in what I'd done in life. When Jason Lekowski showed up, he seemed to be interested in what he had done in life. He'd explained some of the stuff he had been doing. The lifeguard, being a lifeguard, being EMT certified, stuff like that.
So the defendant told you that he was a certified EMT
This is correct.
and that he was 19 years old.
This is correct.
What did you think about the defendant being there that night?
He had as much right as anybody else to be there.
Did it seem like he was properly equipped or prepared to be out there doing what he was doing that night?
He seemed a little under-equipped, and under-experienced as well, which is one of the reasons we kind of stayed with him.
When you say we stayed with him, who do you mean?
Danton merged us and Colette and the female.
Did you feel like you needed to keep an eye on the defendant?
He seemed like it. Yes and no. I felt like, as young as he looked, and the way he was, just the general way he was carrying himself, the protesters would have seen that as a weakness and tried to exploit that.
Is it fair to say that you took it upon yourself that evening to stay close to the defendant to ensure there were no problems?
We pretty much all picked one of the guys that we met at 63rd and kind of looked out for him, yes.
And you personally picked the defendant?
It's kind of more of a he picked me kind of thing.
At any rate, it turned out that you spent a lot of the evening close by the defendant. Fair enough?
That is fair.
Okay. One of the things that the defendant was asking you about was your military experience. Is that right?
This is correct.
What did you tell him about that?
I just told him about the various deployments and what I'd done while I was there.
Now, you mentioned earlier that when you arrived at the 59th Street car source, it was a little after 8 o'clock, a little after curfew. Can you describe for us what the scene was at that location at that time?
Most of the cars in the parking area had been burned out. the building itself had been boarded up pretty good. You could see some evidence on the side of the building where people had thrown things at it to try to start it on fire. But other than that, it typically looked like a war zone, is what I would say.
What about the street in front, Sheridan Road, in that area? Were there a lot of people around at that point?
At the time, it was mostly law enforcement and people similar to us milling around. We had an occasional group of protesters coming through.
Now, there are, on that particular evening, there are protests that were going on in Kenosha. Were you aware of that at the time?
Yes, we could see them up by the courthouse from that position.
Is it fair to say that when you first got to CarSource, most of the protesters and most of the protest was north of your location?
That is correct.
Closer to Civic Center Park, which is right out in front of the courthouse.
That is correct.
Okay. Did there come a time in which the crowd started to come down closer to the 59th Street CarSource?
Before the police started to push them towards us, there were some folks that came through. Most of them were carrying fire extinguishers and said they were putting out fires and whatnot.
You mentioned the police pushing them to you. Did there come a time when that happened?
Yes.
I've seen statements at various times where you have talked about hearing the police say something about what the plan was or what they were intending to do. Did you ever talk to any law enforcement officer that
Yes.
night? And did they tell you something about what the plan was?
Yeah, right before, I want to say around 9 p.m., me and Kyle were walking down to the Ultimate gas station, and we encountered a female deputy. And she told us, hey, we're getting ready to start pushing them down, you guys. Once that happens, it's kind of going to be on you guys. And she got in her patrol car and left.
Who was that person?
I didn't get a name.
So your understanding was that the police were going to move all these protesters into your area and give you the job of taking care of them?
She didn't insinuate that so much as it seemed like what was likely going to happen.
Do you know what the rank of this person was that you spoke to? Was this a captain, a lieutenant, a sergeant, anything like that?
I didn't see any rank.
Other than that, did you speak with any other law enforcement officers about this notion?
No.
Okay. And you said the defendant witnessed that?
That's correct.
And I believe you mentioned that was around 9 o'clock?
It would have been around 9 o'clock.
Had the police already pushed the protesters down your way at that point, or did that come later?
That came a little bit later. They started pushing them around 9:30, 10.
Okay. So I want to talk about the time period from when you first got to 59th at around 8 or so, and that time at 9:30 or 10 when the protesters start getting pushed down your way. So
Sure.
there's an hour and a half, maybe 2 hour period of time.
Okay.
During that time period, where were you located?
For the most part, 59th.
Was the defendant also there?
That is correct.
What were you doing?
Oh, we were just kind of standing around talking. A couple of times, some of the protesters came over and told us that, hey, some people are trying to set this building on fire, so we'd go over there, and when we'd show up, they'd run away. That's around the time that we were told they were trying to light the church on fire. And at that point, we were told it was a bald guy with a red shirt.
So let me stop you for a second. You indicated that there were times in which you received reports that someone was trying to start something on fire, and you said we would go over there. Who's we?
It was a mix each time.
Did the defendant ever go?
He went with us at least once when we went over to the Stella when they were trying to break the windows out over there.
Okay. So tell me what you remember about that.
So the same protesters that were carrying fire extinguishers before, they were from Kenosha. They had stopped and talked with us quite a bit. In fact, we'd helped them carry somebody from up at the protest back beyond the police so they could take them to the hospital. And the defendant helped with that as well. They came running down because there were, in their words, there were people trying to break into the Stella and light it on fire. Somebody had pointed a gun at them, and the cops weren't around. So we headed across the other car source facility, across the way into the burned out cars, and there were 3 to 4 subjects breaking out windows on the Stella and just milling around over there. And once we got to within 100 yards of them, I believe it was Colette yelled out at them. They turned and saw us and they ran off.
You were one of the people, along with Dustin Collette, that went over there?
That's correct.
Who else went with you?
I want to say that Kyle was with us and one of the protesters who had told us about it.
So, I understand no one wants windows broken out or fire started or anything like this, but what gave you the right to go around and police that area?
Well, there were members of the community that asked us to go help them.
Who?
These 4 protesters.
Well, those you characterized as folks walking with fire extinguishers. Were they from the Stella?
They came from that direction.
Were they employed by the Stella?
I didn't ask.
Is it fair to say you heard a report that somebody was up to no good and you decided to head over there and stop it?
Correct.
Other than that, you don't know anything more about what was going on?
No.
And these people you saw milling about at the Stella, do you know who they were?
One was one of them was fairly tall. The rest of the people seemed to be about average height or shorter.
Beyond that description of their height, do you know anything else about them?
No, we didn't get that close.
Don't know where they came from?
Nope.
Don't know their names?
Nope.
Don't know where they went afterwards?
Nope.
Don't know what their affiliation, if any, was with the Stella? Right?
I would assume they weren't affiliated with the Stella.
I would assume somebody breaking the Stella's windows is probably not. I agree with that. But my point is you're making an assumption.
Correct.
With less than perfect information.
That is correct.
You mentioned a fire at the St. James. Was that at the St. James Church?
This church right here.
Now, can you just put your pointer back up right where you were doing? This is a satellite photograph of Kenosha that's a little older. There's a building that you're pointing at right now. On the night of August 25th, 2020, that building wasn't standing anymore, was it?
No.
There was a pile of
There
rubble?
was rubble right here, but there's another building right in there.
Okay. The church itself is actually on the other end of the north end of the block along 58th Street. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. When you mentioned something about a fire or somebody trying to start a fire at that location. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, the same individuals that told us about the Stella showed up again, and they described a female, 2 males trying to light a fire at the church.
What did you do?
We kind of just walked around the street to kind of look around there. When we got there, we could see somebody on the front of the church. They saw us. They ran off.
Did you see anything more than that one person?
No.
Did you see what that person was doing?
No.
Did you see a fire?
No.
Did you put out a fire?
No.
We've talked about, and again, I started this with asking you about that 8 o'clock to 9:30 or 10 o'clock period of time, and you've described a couple of things, the Stella incident, the St. James incident. So beyond that, what other things were you doing in that period of time?
We were walking down to 63rd to check it out. At that point, we had figured out that the folks that said they were going to stay there no longer stayed there. So onesies and two at a time, people were going down there to check on it. Then they would go over to the Ultimate, check on the guys over there, see what they were doing, and then circle back and come back.
We've seen some photos and videos of the Ultimate gas station. Would it be fair to say that there were people protecting that location that were similar to your group, armed with long rifles, things like that?
That is correct.
And you mentioned that whatever these vans were with these folks with melee weapons at 63rd, at some point in the evening you found out they weren't there anymore?
That is correct.
I want to ask more specifically about that. Was that something that you personally found out, or you heard from someone else?
I kind of just heard it through discussion that there was nobody down there anymore.
When you heard that, how many people were in your group guarding the 59th Street location at that point?
It would have been around 7 or 8.
And you said you would send groups of 2 people at a time to go down to 63rd?
That's correct.
Were you ever one of those folks?
Yes.
Was the defendant?
Yes.
What was going on when you went down there?
When we went down that way, there was nobody down there. A couple of the folks that had been down there initially had moved over to the Ultimate. That seemed to be where they had kind of ganged up, but the folks with the melee stuff had kind of gone.
Okay, so I want to make sure I'm understanding you. You said a couple of the folks that were at the 63rd Street car source initially wound up going over to the Ultimate gas station?
That is correct.
Were those folks that came in those vans?
One of them came at the same time the vans did.
Okay. So one of the people that came at the same time as the vans did wound up at Ultimate Gas.
That is correct.
And it sounds like there may have been more than just one person from 63rd that wound up at Ultimate Gas?
There was one other guy that was with him when we showed up.
Okay. So, is it fair to say that, speaking for you personally, Mr. Balch, you felt like it was part of your responsibility to not only guard the 59th Street car source, but also the 63rd Street car source?
That is correct.
Which is why you and other folks were going down there to check on it?
That's correct.
Okay. So I want to continue talking about that 8 o'clock to 9:30 or 10 o'clock period. We've talked about a few things. Other than that, what else were you doing during that period of time?
Mostly we were just kind of talking to people when they would walk by. We didn't really have any negative encounters during that period of time. You'd get the occasional person wanting to have a debate and whatnot, but most of it was just walking down to 63rd, somebody coming saying somebody's trying to light something on fire, go check it out, come back, wash, rinse, repeat.
Okay. So now you've mentioned there was a time when the police started to move the protesters in your direction, and I think you said earlier that was around 9:30 or 10 o'clock?
This is correct.
Okay. Tell us about that.
As soon as they started pushing the protesters, we started to getting the less, I guess the people who weren't intending on participating in a riot, I should say, started kind of drifting down towards us. They were shouting insults at us, and some of the other members of the group were having back and forth with them. I spent the large majority of that time trying to calm people down and just keep them moving down the street. Then we started encountering people who were more and more aggressive, and the cops would push them, then they would back off, then they'd come back and push them again, and they would push them further south each time. That's south.
When you describe these interactions with the people walking past, was the defendant present for any of that?
He had one exchange that I saw.
Who was that with?
Just some random person in the crowd screamed, "Fuck you."
At the defendant?
Yes.
How did the defendant react to that?
He said, "I love you too, ma'am."
You mentioned earlier that there was some sort of report of someone in a red shirt with bald head who was reported to be involved in some sort of incident. I think I heard you mention that as well.
Yes.
We now know with the benefit of hindsight who Joseph Rosenbaum was, and we've seen photographs of him in a red shirt and a bald head. Let me start by asking, whatever report you heard regarding Mr. Rosenbaum at that particular time, did you ever see him at that time?
I had seen someone fitting the description, kind of milling in and out of the groups that were coming through. Every time he was around the groups, now that I know who Joseph Rosenbaum was and can confirm who he was, and stuff. He was not organic with the protesters.
What do you mean by that?
They didn't seem comfortable with his presence or the people that were with him.
Who was with him?
He had a male and a female that were with him pretty much consistently throughout the night.
So you saw those folks together?
Yes.
Him and the male and the female. Did you ever see them speaking to one another?
The male and the female, yes, but as far as them talking to him directly, no.
So you never saw Mr. Rosenbaum talk to that male or female?
No.
And you never saw the male and female talk to Mr. Rosenbaum?
No.
But you saw them in proximity to one another, so you're making some sort of assumption that they had some sort of association. Is that fair to say?
I saw them in close proximity with each other several times, which led to that assumption.
Okay. Tell us about the first time that you observed Mr. Rosenbaum.
The first time he was just getting aggravated with someone in the crowd. And the protesters were trying to like separate him from whoever that was. And he was shouting, you know, fuck you kind of things to everyone. And they kind of walked off. And one of the things that stood out to me was the tall male that was with him had a handgun in his hand with the finger on the trigger pointed down to the ground.
Now, you had an AR-15.
This is correct.
And you had your hand on the butt of that AR-15.
No.
At no point?
Hand on the grip with the fingers straight forward along the side of the receiver.
I misspoke when I said butt. I mean, the grip, the pistol grip of the AR-15, you had your hand on that with your finger not on the trigger, but within close proximity. Fair
That
to
is
say?
correct.
Okay. And this individual had a handgun
Right.
with his finger on the trigger.
This is correct.
And that caused you to be concerned of some sort of what?
Well, you're typically taught not to put your finger on the trigger unless you're ready to shoot. The way he was holding it, had anybody bumped into him or him tripped and fell, he would have been sending a round off into who knows what. So I just saw it as unsafe.
And the potential for some sort of tragic accident.
Correct, or he was prepared for something.
Did you ever see him point that gun at anyone?
No.
Did you ever see him fire that gun?
No.
And obviously you had a gun that was bigger and more powerful than his. Fair to say?
This is fair to say.
And you're familiar with AR-15s.
This is correct.
How long had you owned your AR-15?
Since 2012.
So 8 years.
Yes.
And over that period of time, how many times had you fired your AR-15?
By August of 2020, I probably had somewhere close to 10 to 15,000 rounds through it.
And what type of ammo did it take? What caliber?
5.56.
And are you familiar with the term full metal jacket?
This is correct.
And is that the type of ammo you would use?
Yes.
And can you, as a military former infantryman in the Army who's fired 10 to 15,000 rounds, can you tell us a little bit about what full metal jacket bullets are?
FMJ, full metal jacket bullets are just a solid copper jacket around a lead core. There's nothing really particularly special about it. It's not particularly more dangerous than any other type of ammunition. In the state of Wisconsin, you're not allowed to hunt with full metal jacket ammunition.
Do you know why that is?
Penetration, over penetration.
What does that mean?
FMJ versus hollow points. Hollow points are designed to hit the target and expand and transfer the energy. A full metal jacket's not designed to do that. So depending on what it hits, it can just sail right on through.
So it's fair to say that a full metal jacket round fired from an AR-15 has the potential for hitting whatever it's shot at, say a deer, for example, and going through that and continuing on to something down the line.
It can.
As opposed to a hollow point, which typically hits a deer, for example, and then stops.
Yes.
And is it fair to say in your experience that a Glock handgun like you had that night is often loaded with hollow point ammunition, and a AR-15 is often loaded with full metal jacket ammunition?
It depends on what you're doing with it.
Is that what you typically would do?
I tend to run full metal jackets, yes.
In the AR-15?
In the AR-15.
What about in your Glock?
Hollow points.
And why is that?
My AR-15, I mostly use it for target and competition shooting. Glock is more for personal defense.
Loading a handgun like a Glock with hollow point ammunition is what you would consider to be the better choice for self-defense.
Yeah, for concealed carry, absolutely.
What about for open carry?
For open carry, it would be the same thing for a Glock handgun.
When you've fired your AR-15, 10 to 15,000 rounds of full metal jacket ammunition through there, what is the furthest distance of target that you've hit with that?
500 yards.
So it's a weapon that's capable of shooting a full metal jacket round and hitting a target 500 yards away.
Its maximum effective range is 550 yards. This is correct.
Now, we were talking about Mr. Rosenbaum and your observations of him, and I think you described something out in the street with some other protesters, or he yelled F you to them, something along those lines. What else did you see him do that night?
Every time I encountered Joseph Rosenbaum, he was hyper-aggressive and acting out in a violent manner.
When we say violent manner, you saw him hitting, punching, kicking people?
He was always having to be restrained by someone.
Okay. And I understand that. Did you ever see him hit anyone?
The crowd was pretty good about getting in between him and whoever it was. If he landed a blow, I didn't see it, but he definitely wanted to.
Well, now, you have no idea, do you, what was going on in Mr. Rosenbaum's head?
No.
You'd never met him before that night?
No.
Okay. So let's just keep to your observations if we can.
Right.
How tall are you?
5'9",
How tall was Mr. Rosenbaum?
5'4", 5'3".
So much shorter and smaller than you.
Yes.
Fair? Now, I know you want to talk about what you believe he was intending to do, but my question to you was, did you ever actually see him hit anyone?
No.
Did you ever actually see him kick anyone?
No.
Did you ever actually see him with a weapon in his hand?
No.
Did you ever actually see him cause any physical injury to anyone that night?
I saw him attempt to do it on a couple occasions, but I never saw him
That was
do
not my question, Mr.
Right.
Balch. Did you ever... Excuse me?
It was my impression he was answering your question.
You'd agree with me?
Cross-examination, right?
Pardon me?
It's not cross-examination. He's supposed to ask open-ended questions. He was answering.
It was my impression that the witness had not completed his answer.
I apologize. I'll try to stop jumping in a little too soon, Mr. Balch. Did you ever see the defendant actually physically Mr. Rosenbaum, did you ever actually see Mr. Rosenbaum physically injure anyone that night?
No.
Did you personally have any interactions with Mr. Rosenbaum?
I got between him and Colette at one point, and then he threatened me and the defendant.
The time you described where you got in between him and Dustin Collette, between Mr. Rosenbaum and Dustin Collette, was the defendant present for that?
It immediately preceded him threatening me and Kyle Rittenhouse.
So was the defendant present for that?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Colette had stopped him from starting something on fire. There's a video of it, and Dustin Colette said something to the effect of "fuck around and find out," and I stepped in and told everybody, hey, chill out, calm down, stop doing that. I turned and had an exchange with one of the protesters, and I kind of explained to that protester, hey, I get what you're trying to do, but not this. And when I turned around, Rosenbaum was right there in front of my face, yelling and screaming. And I said, dude, back up, just chill. I don't know what your problem is. And he goes, you know what? If I catch any of you guys alone tonight, I'm gonna fucking kill you.
And he said that to you?
Correct.
Did he say that to the defendant as well?
The defendant was there. So yes,
And as far as you could tell, the defendant was close enough to hear what Mr. Rosenbaum said.
that is correct.
Now, when this conversation occurred, were you wearing your AR-15 slung in front of your body?
That is correct.
Did Mr. Rosenbaum ever reach for it?
He didn't try.
Did he touch it?
No,
You had your Glock pistol on your hip, correct?
that is correct.
Did he ever reach for that?
No,
Did he ever touch that?
no,
Did he ever touch you?
no,
And at that point, could you see that Mr. Rosenbaum had no weapons of any kind?
he had a bag full of what looked to be chemicals to me in his hand, the guy with the Glock with a handgun behind him, and a female with a backpack. That was what I considered Rosenbaum having with him.
Okay. So a couple things. First of all, this bag, this plastic bag,
Yes.
was it something that you could see inside?
It was a clear hospital type bag. It had containers, but I couldn't really tell what the containers were. I made the assumption at the time and told the FBI the same thing, that I thought it was for making Molotov cocktails.
And was that actually true?
I saw a similar bag later in the night that didn't contain those chemicals. So the assumption
Did not? Did not?
did not.
When you say you saw a similar bag in the night, what you mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, is after the defendant shot Mr. Rosenbaum, in that incident, Mr. Rosenbaum threw that same, we can see from the videos, he throws that same bag at the defendant, and it is left lying on the ground of the 63rd Street car source. You're aware of that from all the videos, correct?
Yes.
Did you go to that 63rd Street car source after the defendant killed Joseph Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Did you see that plastic bag laying on the ground?
Yes.
Did you look inside of it?
Yes.
Did it have any sort of Molotov cocktail?
No, it had some like bottles that would be for soap, but I'd seen plenty of people carrying those around during the protest, so I had no idea what was actually contained within them.
And when you say you've seen a lot of people carrying bottles of soap around?
Incognito bottles to carry things around in.
When you looked inside the bag that Joseph Rosenbaum was carrying, did you see any chemicals that could be used to start any sort of tear gas or explosion or fire or anything along those lines?
I didn't really so much as look into it as I kind of picked it up and just kind of tossed it back on the ground. But it didn't appear to be any sort of lighter fluid or anything like that in there.
Did you see anything in that bag that you would construe as harmful or dangerous?
No.
In fact, you felt safe enough to walk up to it, pick it up, and look at it. Fair?
That's fair.
So getting back to this incident where the defendant or that Mr. Rosenbaum is talking to you and the defendant, you mentioned that there's two people, male and female, that are close by. As we sit here today, do you now know who those folks were?
No, I don't.
Did that male and female that you're talking about, did they say anything to you?
No, the male always just had kind of a grin on his face the whole time. Like he was kind of enjoying all the violence and shenanigans that was going on.
Other than that, did he say anything to you?
No,
Did he say anything to the defendant?
I never saw him speak to the defendant.
Did you see the female speak to you at any point?
No,
Did you see her speak to the defendant?
no,
Did either one of them do anything threatening towards you?
no,
Did either one do anything threatening towards the defendant?
no.
You've described a series of events that occurred, and I'm trying to go back to the timing here, because I think you mentioned around 9:30 or 10 o'clock is when the police started pushing protesters by, and I think you said there were times when the protesters would come back and then be pushed back and forth. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Would you mind using that pointer, laser pointer again, and point out the 59th Street car source, please? And just for the benefit of the jury, when you talk about the police moving the protesters out on the street, would you agree with me that the police are pushing people south on Sheridan from 58th to 59th and eventually down south to 60th?
That is correct.
And then you've described times when the police would pull back. Would they pull back north of 59th?
Yes.
So the protesters would be cleared from your area, but then allowed to come back in front of you and back and forth?
Yes.
Okay. When those movements would occur, I know you've described a little bit about the interactions with the folks on the street. In general, how would you say the attitude was of the people on the street towards you and your group?
Most of them seemed indifferent.
When you say most of them, were there others that didn't seem indifferent?
There were some that either seemed really angry about us being there, and then there were other people that seemed like they were kind of happy to just stand around and talk to us.
Do you remember there being issues with the laser pointers?
I do remember them calling out about people on the roof pointing laser pointers at them, and during that exchange with the person, somebody in the crowd actually pulls out a laser pointer and started doing the same thing. And at that point, to me, it was kind of null, because who's pointing the laser pointer?
Did you have any sort of laser sight on your gun that would illuminate a target?
No.
Do you know who it was up on the roof who was doing anything like that?
I had no idea who had that up there.
Do you recall speaking with a individual who was taking video for a news source or a media online source called the Rundown Live?
I remember him coming into the car source area, but it wasn't so much as a formal interview as he was just standing around talking to us.
Do you remember him speaking to you and the defendant when that dumpster fire occurred out in front of your location?
Yes.
Do you remember him speaking about staying on your property as opposed to going out in the street?
Yes.
That's something you heard?
Yes.
What did you think about that?
We had protesters coming on to car source. By this point, we're already going out and people were getting knocked down in the street. We were already going out in the street and dragging them out of the street, making sure they were okay. He seemed to be he seemed to want to keep us out of the street as much as possible. But by that point, there really was no declination between what was car source and what was the street.
Well, you knew where the property line was.
Yes.
But I understand you wanting to maybe go out and help people and things like that, but did you interpret that message, or did you think to yourself, we can stay here and protect this property, but it's not our job to go out there and police the neighborhood? Did that thought ever occur to you?
Not really, no.
Okay, so you felt like you were free to go out and confront people that you felt were doing things wrong?
No.
Help me understand that then.
It wasn't so much as I'm going to go out there and confront people because I can. It was if somebody from the crowd asked us to go help them, we would.
Okay, so
Only
if you're invited.
Right.
But you weren't going to just rush into a situation when you're uninvited and try and interfere.
That's correct.
Forgive me if I've already asked this, but I'm trying to keep the timing straight here. We've talked about your arrival at the 59th Street car source at around 8 p.m. When you first got there at that time, was there other folks that were supposed to be stationed at the 63rd Street car source?
No.
So when was it that you learned that the group that was supposed to be at 63rd Street
Your Honor,
had...
I'm going to object to this. This was all gone through 40 minutes ago.
How much longer do you expect this particular examination to last?
Of this witness in total?
Well.
Or about this particular issue?
Well, it's been a lengthy discussion, and I'm just wondering where we're getting.
If I could just finish this question, I'll jump forward. I'm sorry. I may have missed the answer earlier, and I apologize if I've already asked this. Do you remember when it was that you first learned that the folks that were supposed to be at 63rd weren't there anymore? What time of the day or evening?
It would have been about an hour after we actually got to the 59th Street.
So I think you said you first got there at 8, so maybe
Yes.
9?
9.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned you had an interaction with Mr. Rosenbaum.
Yes.
Was that at the 59th Street location?
Yes.
After that, did you have any other interactions with him that night?
We encountered him hit and miss throughout the night, but he never approached us again that I saw, and he tried to engage us.
But you saw him around?
Yes.
Okay. What were your impressions of him when you saw him on those other times?
No, he was in the middle of them trying to light things on fire, smashing anything he could. In general, he was just being aggressive to the other guys down at the Ultimate. The protesters were getting pretty upset with him being around. They were very quick to let us know throughout the night, hey, that guy's not with us, that guy's not with us. Don't be mad at us. And hey, we get it. We've already dealt with him before. And that was just the general vibe from him throughout the night.
So you mentioned that you saw him starting things on fire. When did you see that?
A couple more dumpsters. They tried to light a road sign on fire that he was a part of that. Just random little things.
Do you know if the defendant saw any of that?
It's possible. The defendant was close by when all this was going on.
When you say Mr. Rosenbaum was trying to start some other dumpsters on fire, where was that at?
Throughout the street, all up and down 59th.
Did he ever take any or was involved in any of the dumpsters at Ultimate Gas being started on fire, if you know?
I do believe, talking to people after the fact, that he was, but I couldn't confirm that myself.
Okay, and again, I'm not interested in what other people think or even what you've seen. That particular night, and I know it's hard to pretend you haven't seen any other videos in the last year, but I'm trying to focus in on what you actually remember that night, what you saw that night. Do you remember seeing Mr. Rosenbaum actually start any of those dumpsters on fire?
No.
Do you remember actually seeing him start that street sign on fire?
Yes.
Where was that at?
That would have been... The protesters had been pushed a little bit south of us at that point. Oh, where's the button? But there were road closed signs all through here, and they drug one off right about where I'm at. Right in there.
And so you're pointing to a location on Sheridan Road just north of 60th?
That's correct.
And when you say they took a sign, did you see Mr. Rosenbaum do that?
Yes.
And what happened then?
They tried to light it on fire. It wouldn't go, so they kicked it over.
When you say a road closed sign, can you describe what that looks like?
It was one of those big metal, the ones that they're portable that they can put in front of a road to stop it, to close it real quick. So about as wide as the witness stand is.
And again, you said they tried to start on a fire, but they couldn't.
Yep.
So they just knocked it over.
Yep.
Other than that, did you see Mr. Rosenbaum try and start any other fires?
Not after that, no.
I think you said he was trying to smash things?
Yes.
What did you see?
He was throwing rocks into the car source area. He was throwing rocks at buildings along the street. He was having a pretty good time.
Did you ever see him throw any sort of tear gas or gas container or anything along those lines?
I never saw him personally throw anything like that.
When you say he was throwing rocks into the car source location, do you mean the 59th Street car source
The
location?
59th Street and the gas station that's attached.
Okay. Did you see those rocks hit anyone?
No, I didn't see him hit anyone.
What action, if any, did you take after seeing the defendant throw rocks at your group? I'm sorry, Mr. Rosenbaum.
We didn't really take any action. By that point, the protesters were also pretty done with people doing that, so they were policing them as well.
Did you feel like Mr. Rosenbaum's act of throwing rocks at your group was a danger to your safety?
Yes.
Did you feel like you needed to defend yourself?
At that time, no.
Why not?
His aim wasn't very good, and he was pretty far away. He was pretty far away.
Sounds like he was trying, but not really succeeding.
Yeah.
Other than what we've just talked about, did you have any other sightings, conversations, encounters, or anything along those lines with Mr. Rosenbaum that night?
No.
Now, you said there was a time in which you, where the police had pushed the protesters down south of 60th Street. Is that right?
That is correct.
And I know you said that there was some back and forth. Did there come a time in which the line of police vehicles kind of finalized and stayed at 60th?
Yes.
When that happened, were you still at the 59th Street location?
That is correct.
After the police had pushed all the protesters south of 60th, was there any further risk of danger to the 59th Street car source location?
We were unaware of if or when the police were going to pull back again, so we did leave people there.
If the police hadn't pulled back, if they'd stayed at that 60th Street line and kept the protesters south of 60th, would there have been any further risk of danger to the 59th Street location?
This is speculation.
Sustained.
After the police pushed the protesters south of 60th, was there any damage done at all after that to the 59th Street location?
Not that I'm aware of.
Were there any protesters around even trying to cause any damage to that location?
No, most of the protesters that were still up at 59th with us were just standing around talking.
After the, okay, so the police, I understand you may not have known at the time, but it turned out that they established that line at 60th and pretty much kept it there. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Did you ever, once that happened, did you ever walk through that line heading south on Sheridan?
Yes.
Who was with you when you did that?
Jason Lekowski, Kyle Rittenhouse, and Dustin Collette was supposed to be with us.
When you say he was supposed to be, what happened?
Once we got across the line, I turned around and didn't see him.
Where did you go?
From there, I got mixed up in the crowd. I ran across the Ultimate, went inside there, and came back and started looking for the defendant.
Was this the time where the Daily Caller reporter Richie McGinnis was following you?
We had passed Mr. McGinnis before we crossed the police line south of 60th.
Okay. So you're aware of this video of Richie McGinnis interviewing the defendant, and then you and the defendant walking south on Sheridan through the police line with Mr. McGinnis with you. Is that
Correct.
right? Is that the time you're talking about?
Yes.
And you said there was someone else, Mr. Lekowski, with you?
Yes.
Is he? Do you know? Is he pictured in that video?
You see him following in behind us, I do believe.
Okay. Now, we watched that video earlier today.
Yes.
There is a time in which you encounter some folks with some fire extinguishers. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that.
Once you passed 60th, and just so we're clear, you were walking on the west side of Sheridan Road,
Correct.
south of 60th. Richie McGinnis is there recording, correct?
Yes.
Tell us what you did after that point.
Once we got through 60th, we kind of paused on the north side of 60th. They were throwing rocks at the cops. And once they saw us there, they stopped throwing. They kind of shifted where they were throwing the rocks at the cops immediately right next to us to a little further down. We walked across, and once we entered the crowd, the defendant started asking people if they needed any first aid. I was doing the same. And walking through past there at an indeterminate time, I lost track of the defendant.
Had you discussed with the defendant what your plan was once you crossed that police line?
We were going to check and see if anybody needed any first aid, then go down to 63rd and make sure nobody was destroying it. And I'm not sure if the defendant was there when I said it, but me and Lukowski had agreed that if we got separated, we would go back to 59th.
Did you have any specific instructions for the defendant when you were heading out in that location?
Yeah, it was just stay close, don't get separated, and see if anybody's hurt.
You also told him to keep his mouth shut and not engage with people, correct?
I told several individuals at 59th Street that.
Including the defendant?
I believe I told him not to respond the way he was to certain people.
What do you mean the way he was?
That goes back to earlier in the night when he said, "I love you too, ma'am." That's when I told him, hey, don't say that. Don't even respond.
Why not?
Just because it can cause somebody to escalate the situation if they feel like you're making fun of them a little bit. So it just wasn't needed.
So the plan once you cross 60th is stay together, but if you get separated, go back.
Correct.
And try not to engage.
Correct.
And you said there came a time in which you lost track of the defendant.
This is correct.
How did that happen?
Got lost in the crowd. I had a female protester approach me and started to try to get into a pro-gun, anti-gun exchange. From there, I went inside to see if he'd went to the Ultimate to get any snacks. When I came back out, I encountered more individuals protecting the property. I talked to them. I assumed at the time he wasn't over there anymore, and I started to make my way back north to 59th.
Can we please play exhibit number 17? I'm going to need to turn on the TVs again.
So you guys are kind of like medics who are packing.
Yeah,
right?
basically. Well, he's an EMT, and
Gotcha.
I'm just kind of protecting his ass.
Oh, so you're a certified EMT?
Yeah.
Gotcha. And do you work as an EMT normally?
I'm a lifeguard normally. I got my ALS and I got my
Gotcha.
And I'm former Army infantry, and I got a whole bunch of trauma training.
Well, thank you for your service.
We got you if you get needed.
I appreciate the service.
Oh, shit. Dude.
Stay away from that vehicle. Get out of the roadway. Thank you. There's a guy with a rack. Be careful, right behind that white fence. There are racks in there, so be careful.
Hey! Friendly! Hey, medic coming through! Medic coming through! Medic coming through! Medic coming through! Does anybody need medical? Anybody need medical? We're running triage over here! Anybody need medical? Hey, guys. Medical? Doctor, you telling the guys about the fire extinguishers are here to put out the fires? They know. Okay, good. They know. You just got shot up. You good? Yeah. Over here? It's all right. Where are you shot? I'm not shot. I'm just... You just said you got shot. No, I didn't.
I thought you got rubber bulleted.
Oh, no, I just got rubber.
Pause the video right there. Did you see yourself in that video?
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears that you are a little bit ahead of Mr. Rittenhouse in this video, but then you start walking east across Sheridan Road.
Correct.
Okay. And in that direction is the Ultimate gas station.
Yes.
Do you remember where you went after that?
That's the point at which I went inside the gas station
Okay.
and then came back out.
I thought I heard you say that the purpose of going across the police lines was to see if people are hurt and to go check on the 63rd Street location.
That is correct.
Help me understand, how does going to the Ultimate gas station and going inside fit in with that?
Because there were other people at the Ultimate gas station.
I don't understand what that
To
means.
go over there to see if they're hurt too.
Oh, I see. So you went over there to see if those people needed help?
Yes.
Did you go inside the Ultimate gas station?
Yes.
And I think you said at one point you were going to get a snack for yourself.
Yeah.
Did you know at that point that you were leaving the defendant?
No.
What did you expect he was going to do at that point?
I thought he was following me.
How long was it before you realized he hadn't followed you?
By the time I got across the street.
What did you do then?
I continued on to the Ultimate gas station and talked to some of the guys there. Turned around, he wasn't around. Went back inside and went inside.
Inside the gas station?
Yes.
Why didn't you go looking for the defendant?
I assumed that he had went inside the gas station as well.
And then when you looked inside, did you see him?
No.
So where did you look for him then?
Back outside the gas station?
In the gas station lot?
Yes.
And this is a time in the evening when there are a lot of people in that lot.
This is correct.
Did you find him?
No.
So if he's not inside the gas station and he's not in the lot, did you go out around the area looking for him?
I walked on the outside of the crowd and tried to look for him, and then I decided to head north to 59th.
Why is that?
That's where I told Lukowski we should go.
Do you know where Jason Lukowski was at this point in the video that we just paused at?
He was behind Richard McGinnis in this.
And when you walked across Sheridan to the east, do you know where Mr. Lukowski went?
No idea.
When is the next time you saw Mr. Lukowski?
After the shootings happened.
So when you went back, when you left Ultimate Gas and headed back to 59th Street, did you see Mr. Lukowski at that point?
No.
Did he return to 59th Street while you were back there?
I never made it back to 59th Street.
Why is that?
The shooting started.
Okay, and we'll get to that in a moment. So your testimony is that as we're watching this video now, which has been taken by Richie McGinnis, and we see the defendant right there, that Jason Lukowski is somewhere close by.
He should be.
Okay. Can we continue to play the video, please? Let us know if you see Mr. Lukowski, okay?
No, it didn't even leave a welt. It just stung. It just fucking stung. I knew.
Little pepper boy never hurt nobody.
It was literally just like, oh,
It's a little spicy, that's all.
It was like, oh shit, that was really annoying.
Yeah, a little salsa.
Could you please not? Does anybody need medical? Does anybody need medical?
I think someone's got some medical weed, I'll tell you that.
Does anybody need medical? Medical! Does anybody need medical?
You were just the one talking about get out the car, trying to help you out the car. Now you trying to do medical? I don't remember you. You said get out the car. Fuck you talking about medical? Yeah. Your ass is
Does anybody need medical? Medical!
What, yesterday or today?
Today. Dude, he just had up the gun talking about get off the car. Now he's talking about medical.
What car? Over in the dealership?
Car
Sorry,
down
I
there.
won't film.
I'm going to stop it there because there's nothing to see in the rest of this video. Did you see Jason Lukowski at any point in this video?
No, but the camera never panned to the rear either.
Sure, I understand. I'm just asking if you saw him. Okay, fair enough. So you indicated that you went over to the Ultimate Gas and then eventually back to 59th.
I headed towards 59th.
Okay. When is the next time, after what we've just saw here, when is the next time you saw the defendant that night?
I didn't see him again that night.
At all?
Outside of a picture, no.
All right. I would like to play exhibit number 18 at that timestamp I indicated, please.
Things are a lot more peaceful now.
The cops decided to gas the fucking area.
Yeah.
Here I am walking the EMT around, protecting his ass. Now the EMT's working out.
Seconds. We missed a little bit of the beginning of this. A little bit further. Yeah, just play there, please.
And we'll see how this goes, since everyone seems to be peaceful now with the militia. Seems like things are a lot more peaceful now.
The cops decided to gas the fucking area.
Yeah.
Here I am walking the EMT around, protecting his ass. Now the EMT's working out.
Pause that for a second. You saw yourself in that video.
Yes.
You mentioned that the police decided to gas something or other. I didn't quite catch it all. What were you talking about there?
I was talking about when they gassed the 59th Street location.
When you say they, you mean the police?
Yes.
When did that happen?
In the video where they show them throwing me and the defendant a bottle of water, it's like immediately preceding that.
So why do you know what was going on that caused the police to?
They saw that we had protesters standing in and amongst us, and it seemed like they didn't care for that too much.
Okay. Were you affected by that gas?
Yes.
How so?
Well, I'd already been hit with some sort of gas bomb from the protest crowd, and then that's when the gas hit the area, so I had to go inside and sit down for a couple of minutes.
And when you say gas, is this like a tear gas type thing?
Tear gas, yeah.
Okay. What physical effect did that have on you?
I couldn't breathe for a good minute and a half there solidly. Once I got in, sat down, the defendant helped me out with that. I was okay. For the days after, I really couldn't talk too well.
What did the defendant do to help you?
Kept shoveling water at me. So.
Did he give you any sort of medicine or anything
No.
like that? Okay. So when you're talking about the police gassing things, that's what you're referring to?
Yes.
And then you talk about something about the EMT having to guard the EMT or something like that?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
I said I was referring to me watching the defendant.
So you're basically saying that one of your roles was to guard and protect
that was
the
part of
defendant.
my intent for going south.
And this conversation occurs at the Ultimate gas station?
Yes.
Where is this time-wise in relation to what we had just seen, the last video where you were being followed by Richie McGinnis, and then we saw you walk east across Ultimate Gas? Where is this in relation to that?
I don't remember exactly when I had this conversation, but I would say it was probably pretty soon after that.
So this is after you walk across the street. You said you went into the store,
Yep.
grabbed some snacks or whatever, and then I think you actually said earlier you spoke to some of the folks that were... I'm trying to set the time frame for the jury, but the ultimate relevance, Your Honor, is that this witness is indicating that his role was to protect the defendant that night, and he's obviously not with the defendant at this moment.
What would be the relevance of that anyway?
Well, I think it goes to the overall issue of the safety of the defendant and the safety of this crowd, the perceived need, the perceived danger, the perceived need for protection south of 60th Street.
Perceived by whom?
By at least this individual who's close to the defendant.
What relevance would his perception
because they're part of the same group, and he's taken this responsibility, and now they're in an area where there's a perceived need to protect the defendant.
Well, why don't we take a break? Please don't talk about the case during the break. Read, watch, or listen to any account of the trial. Let's see about 5 after.
3:46.
Oh, pardon me?
It's 3:46, so we did 15 minutes before o'clock. Forget it.
Well, you're right. Yeah, you're right. We're going to, she's correct. As I've complained about that clock before, we're going to start at 4 o'clock of actual time, and pay no attention to that clock, which you won't be able to see from the jury room anyway.
Okay.
Okay. 4 o'clock actual time, Central Standard Time. Well, whatever. They know what